very excited to introduce my friend Nadja Taranczewski, who is who is one of the most interesting people I've ever met on the topic of money. Money is I think the most dominant topic for most of my audience, given I think more than half of them come from the finance world. And Nadja has very interesting perspectives that have helped me understand my own relationship to money in ways that I think are actually deeply practical and things that you can kind of do today in ways that not a lot of other work I've seen is. Nadja, would you mind just very quickly introducing yourself to us, and then we can go right into the fun stuff?
Yes, of course. So in a nutshell, I'm a psychologist by training. I've been working as a coach since 2001. I've been working as what was called at the time a facilitator of transformation since 2006, was trained by McKinsey and Company to deliver personal insight workshops to their clients. And so today I work on the one hand with a very exclusive number of individual clients that work with me long term. And I have a company called Conscious You, and we create scalable personal development programs, basically to promote inner work and collective learning in organizations.
Fantastic. And the one question that's so crazily simple but so crazily deep that I've taken from your work, money is. Let's talk about that for a second.
Right. Yeah, money is it really is a fascinating question because, you know, whenever I do this in a live workshop, that's how we start. We have a flip chart and I say money is, and then I ask people in the room to just give me what comes to them. And by the end of 5 minutes, we have 30 different terms on the flip chart, right? So money is freedom, money is responsibility, money is dirty, money is security, money is possibility, right? So you name it, it's on the flip chart. And the person, and you know, we need to credit where credit is due, who came up with the money work. His name is Peter Koenig, and he's a shared friend of ours as well. He realized when he was working with organizations in Switzerland some 45 years ago that there were always the same two fracture points or breaking points in the top teams that he was working with. And one of them was money, right? So they had these amazing conversations about vision and purpose and where they wanted to take the organization. And the moment money was on the table, all bets were off. People started fighting. It was about, you know, this is my department, this is my pot. Families started fighting, not speaking to each other anymore. It was all there. And so he became fascinated with what is money and why does it affect us so deeply? So this question of what money is actually from Peter's original workshop design, and I still find it a really powerful question to begin with.
And you've broken it into three broad categories of answer. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So money is, when you look at the responses you get and how people relate to money in their own lives, you have what we call three types. The first type, when you really dig deeper, you know, sort of the first level of understanding what they believe about money, and you take it just one step below, money is something negative in their eyes, right? So they might have beliefs like money is the cause of all conflict. Money is separation. Money is dirty. Money is manipulative. Money is destroying the planet. Now, the reality is, if you hold these beliefs about money, you're going to create a very fraught relationship with money in your life. In effect, people who have such deep, and we're talking here about unconscious beliefs about money that are often even transgenerational, right? So people have been carrying them around for a long time. If you have these beliefs, you will experience a difficult reality with money because you are likely not going to have any money in your life ever. Because of part of you, of course, you know, if that's what you believe money is, then there is a movement of separation. You don't want to have these qualities in your life, understandably, because none of that sounds really sexy or fun or, you know, wonderful about who you are as a person. So therefore, you push money out of your system. And people who have these kind of deeply rooted unconscious negative beliefs about money, they often have the experience of having to earn their existence, and it's a constant struggle, right? And their accounts are usually chronically in the minus. Then we have the second type, right? So you have things on the flip chart, and and people, when you talk to them about it, they really mean it. Like money is freedom, money is possibility. A classical one is also money is security. So these are quote unquote positive connections that we have to money. However, if they are unconscious, we don't actually experience an easier reality than the first group, interestingly, because one would think, I'd rather have positive beliefs about money because that sounds nice. But the experience that these people have, and I'm sure many of your audience can share this experience, is theoretically what I have should be enough money, but somehow it never really feels like that, right? So I never really feel safe. I never really feel free. And in some ways, even the opposite, the more money I have, the more worried I become about money, about making my money work for me, about making sure that it grows, that it doesn't deteriorate. Yeah, so I become a slave to money. And my sole purpose of existence becomes securing my assets, securing my money in some way. And that's also not a great way to be. It's, all of your life's energy is suddenly bound in a place where you're not actually bringing your biggest contribution to the planet, even though your account might be always in the plus. And then finally, and that I could also imagine as some of the people you attract into your field, we have a mixed projection type that we lovingly call the washing machine, because they sort of, flip-flop between negative and positive beliefs about money. And what happens then is that they go back and forth between greed and disgust. Yeah. So greed is the what is that called in the Bible? The primary sin,
Deadly sin.
deadly sin of people who have unconscious positive beliefs about money. Yeah, so there is this greedy part in me that really believes I need to have money to be somebody, to acquire all of these wonderful positive things that I've attached to money. But then suddenly consciousness comes in, right? And I'm developing as a person. I'm beginning to sense a different reality. I feel I want to make a contribution, and I maybe also think I can make a contribution with my money. So in some ways, a part of us is awakened that feels a little bit disgusted by money, that doesn't like what money is creating in the world. So that part goes into impact investment, right? And says, well, let's make a difference with the money that I have. And so I'm going to invest in all of these amazing projects. And that usually works until some vulnerability in you is triggered, and suddenly you flip-flop back to the other side of the equation, and suddenly it's all about the bottom line and your return on investment. And frankly, I've seen that many times over. Investors like that drive anybody they're investing into crazy, right? Because they never know which side they're going to get. Yeah, are they going to get the visionary who wants to invest the money for greater good on this planet, or are they getting the one who has the spreadsheet in his hand or her hands and that looks at the bottom line? Yeah, so there's a lot to be said about if you really want to make your money work towards your purpose, towards the values that you hold. You need to dig deeper. You need to understand your psychological makeup when it comes to money. That, again, is often very deeply connected to your family's history.
It's amazing. Okay, let's get real here. I identify probably more with two than with three, although I can flip-flop as well. I'm reading a very new agey book at the moment, and the new agey book says money's not real at all. Like money is a creation of your consciousness, and should you pick the right creations in life, you'll never run out of money. And whilst that fits with a lot of the metaphysical and conceptual work that I've done, the idea triggers me so much because I live in America and I've lived here for 15 years, and it's probably the most unforgiving place on earth in many ways if you start falling through the cracks. The requirements on you financially are very, very high, even if you're at a high income level and even if you have two incomes. And if you start falling, very little catches you, both from a community perspective and from a financial perspective. And a lot of your self-worth gets tied up into money. And obviously, this is maybe more my psychological issues than a general one, but I feel it's shared by a lot of my audience. And so you have, I think, at bottom, this sense of great, this all may be true, but money is quote unquote real, and I can run out of it. And there is this scarcity at bottom. How do you help people approach this concept of kind of ultimate scarcity, where what happens if I hit zero in that checking account?
Hmm. So, you know, firstly, this money work is surprising in the sense that it's a deeply personal process. Yeah. So there is very little that I feel comfortable in generalizing about people's story when they actually do money work, because it is so subjective, right? So in some ways, I would really say each of you listening in, do your own money work, and you will be really surprised what you find, you know, the pot of gold that you may or may not find at the other end. As to the book you're reading, I agree to some degree. So yes, money is a social construct, or we could also say it's a collective projection, right? It's something that we've agreed upon together. So it's like the emperor's new clothes, right? If as many people, you know, or if enough people say the emperor is clothed, it sort of works, right? The moment too many people actually say, well, I don't know, I think the dude is butt naked, everything crumbles, right? And we've seen that in many places across the world when trust in this shared illusion, in this shared promise falls apart, money's worth nothing, right? So we see how very little water this illusion actually holds. So what the book promises is true to some degree, but I would take it a level beyond that, because the author is still stuck, I think, in a belief that having money is actually the place to be. And I don't know if that's true, right? So what, you know, what we say, and Peter and I wrote an online program about this process that he has developed. And in the program, at the very beginning, we always say, listen, we need to be clear about one thing, because the program is not one where we say, well, once you have resolved all of your money projections, you shall be rich. Yeah. What Peter says is, once you have uncovered and integrated your money projections, the right amount of money for your current level of development shall find you, and you will be happy with what that is, because you can then fully understand and relax into that this is the amount of money right now that seems to be the amount you need to support you in your development, if that makes sense.
I mean, it's an incredibly powerful idea. Have you seen it happen in practice? Are there any stories you can share about this process working for people, and I guess the generalized anxiety of money going away?
Yeah, a lot. And, you know, so interestingly, to be honest, our program often attracts people who have a fraught relationship with money, and they know it because they never have money in their account, right? Because when you are, when you have difficulties with money, when it seems to be something you can never get your hands on, it's really easy to admit to yourself, well, actually, money is kind of an issue in my life. Whereas in my individual practice, I also nearly exclusively coach these high net worth individuals, and they would never really start with the assumption that they have an issue with money, because they have money, right? But then when we dig deeper and we look at the relationship level, right? So how is money showing up in your love life? How is money showing up with your siblings? How is money showing up with your parents? How is money showing up with your business partners? There isn't really a single person who has a very relaxed relationship with money and would truly be able to say money doesn't cause tension in my life. Yeah, so that's the first thing. Both of these sides are possible. And now, you know, one example, I once had a client in one of my programs who is self-employed, and she was raising her hand when we, you know, sort of did hot seat coaching, and she said, okay, here's the thing, I cannot write invoices, right? So every time I try to write an invoice, I just have this block. I just cannot get myself to do it. And of course, I'm realizing this is stupid because nobody else is going to do it for me. So I need to learn how to write invoices. So what we usually then do is interview people a bit more deeply about their story, their parents' story. So anything that sort of arises in them when it comes to money, which links back to money stories are very personal. So in her case, at some point, she said something along the line of, when I was a baby, I was part of a cohort of babies in Germany that were operated on without anesthesia. And
Okay.
apparently that was a practice in
Yeah.
Germany, which I didn't know until sort of, not that long ago, like the mid 80s or something.
No, it was a practice, I think, in the Western world that they didn't think that babies had fully evolved pain sensors or something. And so they were doing non-anesthetic surgeries on babies. It's just like, oh my God. Yeah.
Exactly, right. And she was one of those. And in Germany, there's even this, added wonderful layer of, the whole Nazi euthanasia medicine and sort of, I mean, it really is not a pretty picture. So I had no idea that even existed until she told me that. And she sort of brushed on that and then went on talking about something else. And what I always listen for is, what is the experience that a person is not willing to have, right? So what comes up when they talk about money, where I feel there is some room in their inner house they're not willing to step into? And for some reason, I often have these sentences. So in the money work, we work with language, and then we test in the body, how does a sentence, how does language sit? What kind of a reaction does it create? So the language, or the sentence that kept coming up for me when I looked at her was, I'm a worthless piece of meat. And I asked her if I could share something with her. And I said, listen, this is, I'm very aware that this could be highly triggering, but it keeps coming up in my mind. So can I tell you the sentence and we see if anything happens? So I said, repeat after me. I'm a worthless piece of meat. And the moment I said that, she just started bawling, right? And I had this moment of, oops, right? Because of course, when you work online, there's also, sort of a lesser degree of contact. But we were able to hold the connection. And after a while, I just held space for her to have her reaction, because that was the first time in her life that she was able to feel the thing that she wasn't able to look at before at all. So that was a door in her inner house that she never opened because it was so scary. Now, how does that connect to money? What she realized is, well, if I'm a worthless piece of meat, then what's my place to write an invoice to anybody? What am I contributing in the world? Like, I'm not worth it. Yeah. So then the money works as such that we take the thing that has been denied, that has been dissociated, and we reintegrate it into a person's sense of identity. And again, we use language for that. And our litmus test is always, how does a person respond physically? So what I told her then, the next step is, you just sort of give yourself permission to have the experience you're having. So in her case, that was, I allow myself to be a worthless piece of meat. And this may sound really awful and very strange to people listening in, but I could feel in her like there was this immediate sense of relief, because it's basically naming something that a part of her assumed anyway to be true all of her life, but had never been able to bring that in contact with her self-image. So by the time we were done with the first polarity, and I will talk about polarities in a moment, she was actually able to say, I'm a worthless piece of meat and it's amazing. And you could, and she was grinning from ear to ear, and there was something so joyous about it. And I said, okay, so tell me, what's amazing about being a worthless piece of meat? And she said, I don't have to do something all the time. I can just lay on the sofa for once and actually not do anything, because if I'm a worthless piece of meat, I can relax, right? So in every room in our inner house that we're not stepping into, there's always a gift. There's always a diamond that is somehow hidden in the rubble. So for her, it was that sort of the ability to just be and not to do all the time. And then we look for the polarity. So the integration is always such that we look for what is the opposite of the statement that you've been denying yourself until now, or this experience that you've been denying yourself until now. And then we see, does the opposite, is this opposite integrated in you? Yeah. So for example, I think in her case, it was something like, I'm of immeasurable worth. Yeah, that was the opposite for her of being a worthless piece of meat. And then the question is, how does that feel in her body to say that? And in her case, it felt positive. And then I asked her, when do you feel like you have immeasurable worth? And she said, when people pay attention to me. Yeah. So that's the hook, though, right? Because here again, you've created a reality for yourself that leaves very little room to maneuver. Because if the only way for you to feel worthy or like a wonderful, contributing, amazing person is when other people give attention to you, what do you become? Yeah. You're constantly seeking for this external validation. Exactly. Yeah. So in the end, she was able to hold both spaces in herself with such grace, right? To be joyous in the I'm a worthless piece of meat and that's amazing. And I'm of immeasurable worth, whether or not people pay attention to me. And that was the integration in her case.
So you've really helped a penny drop for me here, which is that a lot of the value of money in this framing can be actually pointing towards the shadow that people need to integrate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, just a recent example, I just came back this past week was one of the Hearth summits that took place in Austria. And Hearth has been initiated as a global movement for activists, change makers, socialpreneurs worldwide. So we had, I don't know, 300 people there. And Peter Koenig was there too. And we had one afternoon where we offered money work to anybody who was interested, because in this target group in particular, people have a very difficult relationship with money because they needed to realize their projects, but they often don't like it. And the person who came up first was somebody who actually comes from money. So he falls more into this category of impact investors. And when we began to interview him, it became very clear that on a deeper level, his belief about people with money is actually that they're all greedy bastards.
Mm.
Yeah. So then that's what we do. So I listen very deeply to what is the story people tell me, and again, what is the experience they're not willing to have. Now, from a sort of meta perspective, I would say greed is a core human characteristic. We all are greedy in some way. Yeah, it's just something that is innate in our structure, and we need to learn to manage it in a responsible way. But we can only manage what we know we have. Yeah. So if I have disowned greed, it becomes a quality I cannot control. So the sentence that I gave to him was, I am a greedy bastard. And he was like, no. Sorry, I can't go there. Right. And I said, listen, this is the door you have to open. Right. There is no way to not integrate that shadow and be effective with people in this space. Because if you label everybody else who's money as a greedy bastard, you already distance yourself to a great degree. Yeah. How are you going to interact with these people? How are you going to cooperate, finance projects together, whatever it is that you want to do? So, he took a deep breath and we began to integrate this greedy bastard. And he became really joyous in it. And at some point, he said, oh, the image I have is sort of sitting at a huge buffet and just stuffing my face, right? Eating everything and taking it with full hands, like pieces of cake. And then I said, how old is this version of you that would have loved this? And he had an immediate answer. He's like, 4. Yeah. So then I helped him to integrate the greedy bastard by connecting to his inner 4-year-old, because that was the age when he learned that to be greedy is to be bad. Yeah. When he learned that that's not a quality that you're allowed to have. And he had such a fun time with playing with his, inner boy, the 4-year-old, and allowing him to be greedy, to be fully greedy. And it was just a beautiful experience, right? And then on the other side, he had something around. So if he's not greedy, what's the polarity? And his polarity was something around, I give everything. So then I asked him, how does it feel in your body to say, I give everything? And he felt a contraction, right? So he felt a tightness in his chest and sort of a sinking feeling in his gut. So in a way, he had built a trap for himself because he was not allowed in his inner construct of self to be greedy, but he was also not allowed to be to give everything, because that felt like exploitative. That felt like people would ask him of more than he's able to give. That felt like being annihilated by other people's demands on him. So then we did the same thing. It felt negative to him, in other words, to say, I give everything. So we opened the door to that room with the same process of saying, I allow myself to give everything. I give everything and it's amazing, right? So that he now has choice. So I always have the Mobius strip as a symbol in my mind when I work with people, to think about how can I create more flow between these two polarities so that both of them are accessible and can be deployed if and when they're relevant and appropriate.
It sounds like alchemy. It's magical. Um,
Yeah, it
but
feels like
without this turning into like a therapy session specifically for me, I listen to this and I still come back to this idea that what the end result of this process is going to be someone that is focused on something other than money, and the money then exists kind of as a byproduct of their life, right? But I have this fear that if you take your eye off the ball to a sufficient degree to focus on the evolution of our consciousness or whatever project in life you want, you may not care about money, but money cares about you, right? That like you can get to this naive place where you're like, it'll be okay. And then, my God, it is not okay. And you run out and you disappoint everyone in your life, and you're worthless and yada,
right.
yada. So like,
And your wife leaves you and you live on
yeah,
a
yeah, really,
ocean.
yeah, really. And suddenly you're alone again and abandoned and whatever, right? Like, so yeah, again, my therapy. But like, I guess the really squalid and awful question I want to ask is, for the people that you worked with, has it worked out in the sense of like, I know this shouldn't be the question I ask, but has it worked out for them financially? As in, like, have a lot of them got to a place of not caring about money and then gone bankrupt?
I've never actually had a case like that. So here's the thing. It's not that you don't care about money anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you even care about money more than you did before, but you do it from energetically a very different place, right? And so here now, Tom, we come into your woo-woo rating category. Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
probably 8 or 9. I don't
All
know,
right.
right?
Okay. Brilliant.
Yeah, because there is a leap of faith that is necessary, because there is something that happens in a realm that I don't quite know how to describe, where people, on the one hand, so simultaneously, they become less caring and more caring with money. So paying attention to money becomes less of a source of stress to them, and not paying attention to them isn't directed from this white spot in their awareness, but rather from a true sense that life carries them, right? Because the illusion that we all have is that we secure our existence, but that's wrong. Our existence secures us, right? It's the other way around. So what happens in through the process of money work is that sort of a feeling more carried by life is a result, and that can or cannot mean that you actually need to pay more attention to money, right? To give you an example from my life. So I mentioned briefly that I work with a very small number of wealthy individuals in individual coaching. And it's like truly like 4 people at any one moment in time, right? So it's a small number, because the rest of my time I'm focusing on things that I believe in, that actually are scalable programs that are open to the public, that are on a sliding scale. And frankly, we don't really make money with these at all. Yeah, but I believe in them. I really think this work, like the money work, needs to be out in the world. So I'm doing everything to promote that. And then the other day, I noticed suddenly I haven't really been paying attention to money like at all, right? And then my wife came up to me and she's like, honestly, we're beginning to dip a bit into our savings. So maybe it's time. And I was like, oh, okay. So there was this moment of reorientation that happened within myself, where I thought, okay, now it's time to have money in my focus again, because it serves something in me, right? It gives me the freedom to create in the world what I believe in creating. And plus, you know, the clients that I work with, they're all amazing, and many of them are close friends now. So it's not like that is laborsome work for me. So I just had this clarity of intention, and 2 new clients signed up, right? I don't know how that is connected because, again, we were rating 9. I just know the moment that I had this clarity again, I have now this trust that if and when I need money, I will find a way to create it.
You have just raised, thank you, what I believe to be the most heretical idea in Western civilization. I've been tracking this idea for a few years now, and it's the most triggering idea I've ever raised with people, because most people that come to me come in some degree of transition. And I'd like to tell you a story actually, because it's so fresh. But so yesterday I had a meeting with a guy, and I'll keep his identity anonymous. But we've been speaking for about 2 years, because he saw my story online about how I left finance, and now I'm in a place which brings me constant abundance and joy. And for about 2 years, you know, to his peers, he'd won the lottery because he wasn't from means, and he'd got the job in later midlife, and he worked for one of the most prestigious fund managers in the world. And he was unbelievably miserable. And when he finally decided to quit, within 24 hours, he had something closely approximating his dream job. And I said to him, when you quit, watch for that wink from the universe. And he emailed me back, like, again, within 24 hours, to be like, an opportunity came seemingly out of nowhere that used his financial skills, but in service of something that he really cared about. And when I spoke to him yesterday, he was a different human being.
Yeah.
You know, the level of energy in him, the light in him, the relationship with his family, every single thing was different. And the wild thing is that he also sent in his leaving email, he was contacted by a lot of other people from the firm who couldn't believe that he'd done it. And I think that there's this idea that I've been circling as well, which is, some people say the lower can't see the higher. I prefer the disconnected can't see the connected. That once you're in the concept of money scarcity, you simply cannot see beyond it. Once you're locked in a professional situation, particularly a lucrative one, you cannot see beyond it. And it's this idea, this woo-woo idea that you raise, that you're held. And that idea that you're held is the most revolutionary and most triggering idea I think I've encountered.
Yeah. You know, and that you're held, and to just reiterate my previous point, that you're also held in very difficult experiences, or potentially difficult experiences, right? So it can be, what we had in CU Money, for example, is that people, for the first time in their life, went consciously into debt. Because at that point, before they've done the money work, being in debt was the worst thing that they could ever imagine would happen to them. And now, you know, I have to add that, especially in Germany, being in debt is you're a social pariah. Like, you know, being in debt is not a good thing here. So we have a very different relationship to debt than Americans have, for example. And he realized, though, if he is focusing on his vision and what he wants to create, he needs money. He needs to go into debt for that. And so he was then able to go into debt and be consciously and joyfully in debt, because it was serving his purpose. It was serving his vision. Because being in debt is not in principle a bad thing, right? Being unconsciously in debt is awful. Yeah. So there's something about being carried by life to be okay with where you need to be at this moment in your journey. And that may be living in abundance, right? And I remember, Tom, the conversation we had when you were thinking about quitting your job, right? And my sense, and I think I said that to you at the time as well. So firstly, yes, be realistic. What is the minimum amount of money that you feel you need to make a responsible choice, given that you have a family and you live in New York and all of this, and you came up with a number, and then realizing that that number was actually not that high, right? And then helping you to focus really on your vision, and you were very clear on what it was that you wanted to create, and the money follows.
And the advice I'd give to people listening is what helped me is one, the first time I jumped out of a job without a plan, I was like, the universe will hold me. And then I sat on the couch for 3 months. And then latterly I was like, oh, the universe doesn't work that way. You actually have to be doing something. But then the second time, I left my job to start the leading edge. And before I left, my job was spending 4 hours writing a day about stuff that I cared about, but I also felt that other people would care about. Then I would go to jujitsu and train with someone else, and then I would meet interesting people all afternoon. The day I quit, I did the same thing, right? I did the same thing, but with a greater degree of freedom, with no money, but with a greater degree of freedom. And I've approached a lot of people in similar situations. And I'm like, when you make that leap financially, it's actually more about the process in your life, that you have a process you can land in, and that actually you're landing in flow, that you're not landing in some sort of abstract, the universe will hold you. It's, you don't have as much anxiety because you know what you're doing the next day. But I imagine that's a lot easier to do when you've integrated all those different shallow parts of yourself.
Absolutely. I would even say it's essential, right? I mean, there are a few lucky individuals who took that leap, you know, just because they did without any inner work and sort of landed on their feet. But I would say for most of us, the inner work process is the essential part, right? We have to become more conscious. We have to be able to step into these inner places that we have locked off for a long time. And what it enables us to do, and you know, I'd like to also address that specifically to your audience. The promise of capitalism is that if you work hard enough, at some point in your life, you will have accrued enough money to do what you want. And I have seen over and over again that money is not that door. That doesn't necessarily happen, right? I've worked with a lot of people who you know, in my eyes, they have more money than God. And none of them have been doing what they really wanted to do because they're very busy managing their money, right? So that's a trap. And the question is, what is it that you really want to bring to life? What is your contribution? If you want to, what's your why? What's your purpose? Whatever language you want to use for that. And I, you know, frankly, I'm in the category, I don't even believe that there is a purpose for you out there, but I think we all have the right to define our purpose based on the things that we truly believe in, based on the values that bring us joy, that make us feel alive, that make us feel connected. So focus on that, do your inner work, and then have the experience that life actually does carry you. And I have yet to find somebody who took this path and ended up living under a bridge.
Well, that's encouraging. But okay, there's an elephant in the room, and there always is, and the elephant usually comes out within the first 3 minutes of me speaking to anyone about these topics, and it's family. That anyone who has kids of a certain age, particularly in like the tri-state area in America or California, it's a crippling expense. And you know, I sat down my 5-year-old before I was going to leave my job, and I was like, you know, I Daddy's going to leave his job and take a big financial risk. And I realized, I was like, I'm talking to a 5-year-old, and he was like, "That's great, Daddy. Can I watch Spider-Man?" Right? Like and that for me was very helpful. It's just like, oh my God, the degree to which he does not care is palpable. But I needed to have that conversation. But
Yeah.
how do you deal with the people who have that real sense of responsibility to family?
I mean, listen, the first thing is I don't subscribe to anybody to be reckless. Yeah. So don't be an idiot, clearly. Yeah. That's the basic advice. So in terms of the steps, I would say do your inner work, because that will bring you to the place of insight that you need to take the next step with clarity. Have the conversations with the relevant people in your life, and that may or may not include your 5-year-old son, right? Depending, but certainly your spouse, right? Or anybody else who's dependent on you. And then it's not usually, for most people, it's not necessarily even a binary decision, right? It's not, do I quit my job and become a surf teacher on Hawaii, right? It's often not such a drastic step. It's more looking at when I really align with my values, when I can sort of get my fingers on what I think my purpose might be, what could be a first step in that direction? Because you were taking these steps gradual too. By the time you decided to jump, whether you knew it or not, your net was already in place. Yeah. So I would say, you know, obviously do not be an idiot about it. But if you go this process and if you establish the rituals, the structure that will support you in being held, they will hold.
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed this archetypal pattern that's been, I think I can say universal, which is one, an experiment that you have to, you don't have to do this job by burning your life down, that you can keep offering things out to the world and see whether they get traction. But it's also this idea of you spend a lot of life cultivating this kind of left hemispheric skill set of analysis and me being able to speak or write or whatever it is, but eventually about things that you don't care about. And the transition process is about inverting those skills in service of the right hemisphere, something that's meaningful to you and you actually do care about.
Exactly.
And woo-woo rating 9, like that then tends to work out. But again, without you have to make the first step every single time for whatever reason. I don't know why that is. You have to cross the threshold first. But once you do, you often get synchronicities and symbols back. But I would say to people, I guess it doesn't have to be something super dramatic.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be this dramatic gesture. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. And, you know, I was just yesterday receiving a text from one of my individual clients, and she's the CIHO of a big American company, and she's been unhappy in this job ever since she joined. She has a slightly narcissistic CEO. A lot of what happens in the system is crazy to her. She feels what she can truly influence in the system is, you know, it's not working for her. And at some point, you know, we've been having this conversation now for 4 months. And at some point I said to her, listen, I don't know what else to tell you, because at the end of the day, you know, doing the same thing over and over again and thinking it's going to turn out differently, that is crazy, right? We all know this saying. So what are you willing to risk to have a different experience in life? Because I feel often with my corporate clients, they come with me to me with sort of an open heart surgery situation. And then they ask me to put a Band-Aid over it, right? So that they sort of keep functioning until we have the next session. And that sort of works, but it doesn't take away from the fact that they are sitting there with a bleeding open heart. Right. And there's only so many Band-Aids that I can put on this wound. So at some point, you have to make that decision if you're willing to jump or if you're continuing this game of the emperor's new clothes. And she wrote me a text and she said, I just resigned. I'm going to step out of this job on December 31st. And I want to discuss with you what will happen next. And I know she already had conversations with other people about the, you know, what's next. But you have to take that leap at some point. And I could feel her energy. She was so delighted to have broken free of that perceived cage. But I cannot do that for them. You cannot do that for your people. Yeah, everybody listening here, you have to know for yourself, are you playing the right game, right? Is this where you want to be? And if the answer is no, then the question is, how are you taking the right steps to move towards a different reality?
But again, to go back to your approach, I think that if all of I think about like internal family systems, right? That if you have a whole bunch of different parts all pulling in different directions, and some that you don't even know about that are sitting there sabotaging you, freaking out, giving you panic attacks, and you haven't integrated those parts, it's very hard for you to get the run-ups that you need to clear that leap of faith.
Yeah.
And so integrating things and then working out what everyone can get on board with is part of the game, I feel.
Absolutely. You know, and just to be clear with this CIHO client, she's been my client for a year and a half, right? So there has been a long process of doing exactly that, doing a lot of inner work around different inner selves, different inner aspects, really integrating the parts of her that are afraid, the parts of her that feel less than, you know, those parts that we all have. Because frankly, most of the overachievers that are my clients are deeply insecure, right? And are really, really fearful of the judgment of others. And they have locked themselves in this hamster wheel where they keep running like crazy people because they're afraid they won't be worthy. They will not belong. They will not be loved anymore. They, you know, all of these things are real fears in them. So unless you have freed yourself of these fears, it's probably going to be very difficult to actually take a congruent next step.
Mm. Well, my little weirdo brain is thinking while you're talking about what would I title this podcast? And I feel it would be the value of money, because within this framing, the value of money is actually as a pointer towards those issues that you can then actually resolve.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, the problem that we have as a society is that we actually believe the value of money says anything about the value that you have as a person. And that is a very mean misconception because it doesn't. You know, the value of my coaching, for example, I'm relatively expensive as a coach. So a year of coaching is 100K. Now, there are coaches that are much more expensive, but there are many coaches who are much less expensive than I am. But I'm very clear, this is not my value. It has nothing to do with me as a person. This is the value I attach to my service. Yeah. And I'm able to make that distinction. And therefore, I'm also okay with a no, because it doesn't say anything about me. It just says that somebody didn't want that service, and that's okay.
Yeah. That's a really hard step for people in my experience, which is that when you're sitting in a seat, I'll tell you a story. Like, I used to work with people on Wall Street, and one of the guys I worked with went from a very large bank where money flows through you because you sit at a very large bank to the bank that I worked at the time that was a medium-sized bank. And the money stopped flowing. And it had tragic consequences because his self-esteem went from massive to zero because he realized that he was just in that framing, he was just a conduit for that money. And the funny thing is that was true. In that context, he was just a conduit for that money, but that didn't equate to his value as a human being. But in somewhere like Wall Street, that's not, you can't be like, but I'm worth more as a human being. Well, the Wall Street guys will be like, great, well, where's your revenue number? What's the number attached to your head? That's literally how people phrase it. And so I have seen that firsthand but the problem is that the inverse of that isn't a problem, which is then like, what happens if I then put a price on myself as a solopreneur or say a coaching practitioner?
Well, again, don't put a price on yourself, right?
Yeah.
Do not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Put a price on what your service is or what your product is, whatever you might want to call that. Yeah. So, and that's the inner work people need to do, is sort of the dissociation of money and self-worth, because that is the very inhuman system that we've built and that we all perform in. And I frankly think that's what keeps us in this completely horrible relationship that we've developed with so many parts of life, because it starts with self-exploitation. And why are we willing to self-exploit? Because we think we're not worth anything if we don't.
Yeah. Amen. Well, so what's abundantly clear to me is that people listening to this need someone else. This exercise probably needs to be done with someone else. So I'd say people can start by working with you, which I've done to great effect, or by finding a coach like you. If you're listening to this, where would you recommend that people start? Like, how do you start this process?
Well, I know that you're going to share this brief article that I wrote on Medium about the subject matter. So maybe that might be a good place to begin to sort of recap what we touched upon in here. The next recommendation I often have for people is start talking about money. So for example, could you throw a small dinner party with 4 or 5 people, and the questions you ask are around how has money shown up the last 3 generations or 2 generations in your family, right? To understand sort of what is the journey that people have taken? How are they influenced by the choices their grandparents made or had to make, by the choices their parents have made? So we need to begin talking about this taboo that money is. Yeah, because even though everybody has to deal with money all of the time, nobody here that I know is really truly free of that. We don't really talk about money. Yeah, for most people, it's more awkward than talking about sex.
Yeah.
And we need to break that, right? So break the silence about money. Really have a conversation with your spouse about money. Dare to speak about money. That's the first step. And, and I was just thinking, I think what would be fascinating, maybe we can talk about it, is to see if we can even put on a group process for the people in your community, because the other part of it is, yes, I can work with people individually, but I tell you, money process that is witnessed by other people is so much more powerful, and it actually changes something in the collective field, because every money process, whatever we want to call it, it heals something in the matrix. I don't know what to call this field, right? Woo rating again.
Yeah.
Because you are not alone. right? And to realize whatever your story is, how unique it may be, it's still part of the human experience. And when you work and integrate your own greed, when you work and integrate on your own feelings of worthlessness, you do this for the entire group of people that are witnessing you in this process. So in some ways, I also think money work is best done in company.
Yeah, well, that's an amazing piece of advice. Nadja, this was absolutely spectacular. I knew it was going to be good, but it exceeded my expectations. I will put your contact details in the show notes, and just want to say thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me. And thank you for the amazing work you do with your community. I think that is so, so needed.
Thank you again.